So today we're going to dive deep into the trait of stubbornness. We're going to explore what stubbornness really means and what's happening in the brain when we dig our heels in, why we sometimes refuse to change our minds, and how we can work with stubbornness, whether it's in ourselves or in those around us. So in this talk, I'm also going to share a few startling statistics from studies on stubbornness. So first, let's define stubbornness. It always gets a bad rap, but it's more than just being difficult. So at its simplest, stubbornness is a firm reluctance or refusal to change one's mind or attitude or course of action, even in the face of good reason to do so. So the neuroscience of stubbornness, let's cover that up for a bit. It's related to some fascinating studies in neuroscience today in research. So there's research advances in cognitive science that cast a new light on why some of us simply cannot let go of certain ideas or habits. And the brain is often described as a prediction machine. So this concept is rooted in predictive coding theories that suggest our brain is constantly making and updating predictions about the world and testing those predictions against actual experiences. So here's where it gets really interesting. So while our brains can update beliefs when predictions are off, some predictions resist change, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. So these stubborn predictions, as neuroscientists call them, can lock us into fixed ways of thinking or behaving. Now, I'm using simplified language. Of course, there's some very complex terminology here that I'm sparing you from. So there's something called predictive coding. So it's higher brain centers make predictions, and then lower brain centers report errors when the reality doesn't match the prediction. And most of the time, these errors help us update our beliefs, but sometimes the brain assigns high precision or confidence to certain beliefs, making them resistant to new information. In other words, stubborn. So this mechanism has roots in survival. For example, predictions about body temperature or gravity are hardwired in us for a reason. Ignoring them can be dangerous. And for other beliefs, stubbornness can be less adaptive, such as when confirmation bias takes over. So that's when we start filtering out facts that don't match our existing beliefs, reinforcing our stubborn predictions with each new and probably biased experience. All right. Is stubbornness hardwired? So to a degree, yes, it is. Some of our most basic beliefs are extremely difficult to change, either due to genetics, early development, or the neural architecture of our predictive brains. However, there's plenty of evidence that suggests that with effort, reflection, and sometimes professional help, even stubborn beliefs can be shifted over time. So let's look at stubbornness through a psychological lens, because it's not just about logic or neural mechanisms, it's deeply emotional and developmental. So the developmental roots of stubbornness, the patterns trace their roots to childhood. So children naturally experiment with boundaries and control, often saying no as a way to establish independence. And the parental style matters a lot as well. Children who experience overly strict or inconsistent discipline, or who feel their autonomy is repeatedly thwarted, they may develop oppositional behaviors. So that would solidify this stubbornness quality or trait as a defense against feeling controlled or powerless. So over time, if a child hears repeatedly that they're stubborn as a mule, that label may become part of their self-concept. And some stubborn behaviors are direct reactions to attempts to control. Like, if I don't win, others will find out how weak and vulnerable I am. So at its best, stubbornness enables us to stand our ground in the face of adversity. And at its worst, it becomes rigidity, or even what psychologists once called oppositional defiant disorder. There's a disorder for everything under the sun. A pattern of angry, argumentative, and defiant behavior, often rooted in early emotional needs. That's what that is. So stubbornness can also shade into dogmatic or black and white thinking, particularly when tied to ideology or group belief systems. So that's the extreme. So there are emotional underpinnings to stubbornness. So at its heart often lies vulnerability, fear of being wrong, fear of change, fear of losing face or control. And for some, admitting fault feels much more dangerous than pressing on with a questionable decision. So stubbornness can serve as a defense against feelings of inadequacy or insecurity. What about stubbornness in relationships at work? This is interesting here. I got some statistics for you. So surprising to learn just how common stubbornness really is. So according to research published in the Gerontologist, nearly everyone faces stubbornness at home. That's surprising. 92% of adult children and 94% of older parents admit experiencing at least one stubborn behavior from parents in the last few months. So nearly half of those adult children say these moments happen often, and over 3/4 report they came up at least sometimes. So this is not a rare psychological flaw or occurrence. Stubbornness is a shared human experience, and it's common in our most closest connections. So there's a few things I wanted to make note of. Communication breakdowns. So when conversations devolve into who's right and who's wrong, so stubbornness can grind the dialogue to a halt. I mean, if you've ever had a conversation with a very stubborn person or trying to figure something out, you know how difficult that is. People high in stubbornness may become emotionally threatened by disagreement. And they see the attempts to change their mind as personal attacks. You've probably experienced that. I've experienced it. It's exactly what that is. So this makes genuine listening and compromise very difficult. And then there's some power dynamics. So the need to win. Stubbornness is often entangled with power struggles. So whether at home or in the office, some use stubbornness to avoid feeling subordinate or out of control. And the belief that if I'm not stubborn, people will walk all over me. That can drive self-defeating behaviors. So there's some considerations also for gender, for age, and context. So cultural expectations shape how stubbornness is perceived. So in some context, stubborn men may be seen as decisive, while stubborn women risk being labeled as difficult. And age also plays a role. Children are often granted some leeway for stubbornness as part of their development, while in adults it can be perceived as problematic or even inflexible. So understanding stubbornness is not enough. We can help ourselves and others to loosen its grip. Okay, so self-reflection and awareness. It's the first thing. So the first step is self-awareness. So we want to recognize it in ourselves, and that requires humility, curiosity, and honesty. I mean, you definitely have to be honest, humble, to be not only self-aware, but to call yourself out on these things and work with yourself. So, am I refusing to change my mind despite strong evidence? Is my stance rooted in facts, emotions, or old patterns? And what am I afraid would happen if I change my mind? If you're someone that happens to be stubborn and you're watching this, really, I applaud you. That's very impressive. But if you know someone who's stubborn or live with someone like that, your partner, maybe you can work with them from the information that we're discussing today. So while self-reflection and empathy are important, cultivating patience is also key. Stubborn individuals benefit from learning to pause and consider alternative viewpoints before reacting. So moments of stubbornness usually proceed from patterns and triggers. And paying attention to these makes it easier to address them constructively. So whether it's you or a friend or a family member, you want to pay attention to when this arises. What are their patterns or triggers? And to deal with it in a constructive way, not attacking or. So setting small achievable goals for flexibility can gradually build openness without feeling like a loss of identity. Communicating with stubborn people. So dealing with someone else's stubbornness takes patience and strategy. It's like emotional judo. So rather than confronting their stubbornness head on, you got to gently acknowledge their feelings and their position. You got to acknowledge it. Oh, you got to do so much judo, so much work with some people. Timing and empathy, but we're assuming it's well worth it, right? It's worth it. They're worth it. Timing and empathy. Wait for the right moment. Present alternative viewpoints respectfully, never as ultimatums. And listen. Let them feel understood. Sometimes just being heard can soften stubbornness enough to allow flexibility. If it doesn't, at least you tried. But listening is great. And encourage ownership. Change is more likely when the other person feels the idea is their own. I'm not suggesting you do this manipulatively, like twist things into suggestive thought and they came up with your idea. No, but like in the workplace, if you're managing others or working with the team, you introduce things in a way that lets others contribute and chime in and add a little bit to it so they have some ownership. So when engaging with stubborn individuals, it helps to validate their feelings and acknowledge their perspective before introducing new ideas. Got to do that. So this approach reduces defensiveness and opens a door for dialogue. It feels like we're discussing dialogue at the United Nations here, and you're just dealing with someone who's stubborn at home. Oh, some things we didn't sign up for this. Using I statements rather than accusatory language can also prevent escalation. You've got to use I statements now, remember? So for example, saying, I feel concerned when, rather than you are being stubborn. Going back to the emotional intelligence training at your workplace, or spending millions on that stuff. Some of it is good. It's just, you just package it up with a pretty bow tie and they're selling it for millions now. So when faced with extreme stubbornness, setting clear boundaries and knowing when to let go is equally important. So if you're stubborn, I'll share a few things. So when stubbornness is strength, sometimes holding firm is the right move. Standing by values, by vision, and authentic self, even when challenged, can inspire others and drive positive change. Just for you, my viewer, my subscriber, I'm going over some of the good things. We're digging deep right here. Inspire others and drive positive change. The difference is being able to distinguish between times when conviction is necessary versus times when flexibility would serve better. So also the courage to let go. Admitting when you're wrong can feel threatening, but it's also a powerful act of courage. It really is. Leaders, partners, and friends who can own mistakes and reverse course when necessary are often the most admired and trusted. So in overcoming our own stubborn patterns, if you should be stubborn, God forbid, moving beyond stubbornness doesn't mean abandoning your conviction, but gaining the flexibility to adapt and grow. Just incidentally, if you are a stubborn individual, I'd really like if you would comment. Let me know if this was useful. All right. Overcoming our stubborn patterns. Number one, spotting the signs. Notice your internal resistance, especially when challenged by new evidence or ideas? Does your body tense up? Do you interrupt or dismiss? Novelty and play are important. Experiment with new perspectives is a kind of play. Try on someone else's viewpoint. Challenge your own assumptions in low stakes settings. I know this can be difficult if you really are stubborn, but it's worth a try. And then balancing strength and flexibility. I don't know that because I'm not stubborn, but I can imagine. So balancing strength and flexibility. Practice saying, I see your point, or I might have been wrong about that, to build on those flexibility muscles. There's always therapy, coaching, and reflection. I'm not going to suggest anyone journal anymore. I'm done with that. Don't journal. Just consider therapy or coaching if you're an extreme case. Working with a coach or therapist can create safe spaces to unpack the emotional burdens behind stubbornness and lead to healthier ways to assert yourself and stay open to feedback. So feedback from friends and family is very useful. If it's constructive, positive, caring feedback, it's very useful, okay? So I'd like to hear from you. Has stubbornness ever helped you stand your ground, or has it kept you locked inside perspectives that no longer serve you? I invite you to share your own stories and reflect in the comments. So remember to like, subscribe, and don't berate the stubborn person in your life. Just at least give it some time after you finish this video, so I'm not involved in any way.